Okay, I'm striking back again. I joined in on the live stream at Neil Gnostic Informant. Go subscribe, as he was interviewing Dennis R. MacDonald on debunking mythicism. You know, I was a mythicist for many years, and I don't close the door to it, but I find it to not be where I land today. I know this already triggers some of those who are staunch, dogmatic mythicists, but either way, I got to ask the questions of Dennis MacDonald, and he was responding. You're going to check that out right here. See, Dennis specializes on the Gospels reacting or responding to the Greek literature, the Iliad and the Odyssey. He points out in his Mimesis Criticism, but also just as a historical fact, that the Gospel authors had to know the Greek epics, and they're reacting to them, according to Dennis, which is what makes him stand out. He also has a PhD from Harvard University, which might be something to take into consideration. Let's see what Dennis has to say. Don't forget, subscribe to Gnostic Informant.
Darren from Mythvision podcast says, why do you think mythicism is so convincing, Dr. MacDonald? I was convinced originally because I found tons of legend and thought maybe it's all legend.
Well, I wish I had your name. Oh, I think maybe it's Derek.
Yeah,
with Mythvision. I think that's an excellent question, Derek, and I'm going to parse it. The second sentence is, I think, you giving your own answer. There is a lot of legend making and mythologizing going on in the Gospels. And the question is, how much mythologizing is going on? Can it explain everything? And so I think that's why mythicism is convincing, is because the church and the academy have quashed the evidence that the Gospels are imitating classical Greek poetry and mythology. That's embarrassing to the church, and it's somewhat embarrassing to some scholars that they didn't see it earlier, and so that they don't want to go there. So I think mythicism has some clout because it's valorizing a half part of the debate. And also, many of people who are mythicists are not only atheists, but they're also burned out with Christian religion, as I am too. And I can understand why they want an alternative intellectual way of understanding these texts that doesn't have to be burdened with the nonsense of Christian orthodoxy. So I can see why it's convincing. The question is whether it's historically convincing, whether it's literarily convincing, whether it accounts for all the data. So I think there's an irrational agenda in some cases going on with mythicists, that they don't want simply to acknowledge the ambiguities of of God talk and a deity and religion, but they really are taking, I think, unfair pot shots at Christian religion.
Wow, interesting answer. Thank you for the question. But he's also had another follow-up, and it's, does your work in Mimesis Criticism help determine what may be historical and what may be legend, myth? Any examples?
Oh, yes. It's so, Derek, I love you even more than I did before. I'm going to give you an image that I think is so important. I lived in Denver on the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains for 18 years. And in the winter, the winter clouds could be so heavy and low that you couldn't tell if you were living near the Front Range or in the flats of Kansas. But when the sun came out on a sunny winter day and burned off the clouds, you saw the magnificence of the mountains in the background, from Pikes Peak in the south to Longs Peak in the north, and the whole Front Range, Evans, and so on. And it was magnificent, but you never would have seen it had you not had the dissipation of the clouds. In my view, Mimesis Criticism is the sun that burns away the clouds, that lets one see the traditions about Jesus that are relatively unpolluted by mythology. And that allows one to explore the mountains, to hike about, to do scientific calculations of their height and so on, in a way that would not have been possible had the clouds been there. So in my view, Mimesis criticism actually helps the cause of the historical Jesus inquiry, because it helps us understand why some of what we would now consider to be nonsense, which these authors did not perceive to be nonsense. They were playing a different kind of game than a historical game. But once that material is removed, we've got a new front range to play with. And these are ranges that, I'm going to change the metaphor, I have to. These are texts and stories and so on that must have a derivation that is different from the Greek mythology. So it really breaks my heart that mimesis criticism has been used by mythicists to say that Jesus didn't exist. In my view, mimesis criticism allows us to see more clearly what in the Gospels has some plausibility of having been generated by historical Jesus, though even then, not without mythologizing. To put a finer point on it, there are places where already the Q document is imitating not only Deuteronomy, but or not the Odyssey. And I can say more about that another time.
Can you please give us this example of the Odyssey just real quick?
Yeah. What does this sound like, Neil? There's a man who went on a far journey and put his servants in charge. And then he left, and some of the servants were obedient, but one of them got drunk and was eating with the drunkards. And when the Lord of the house came back, he dismembered him. He cut him into pieces. Odysseus, when he left for Troy, put his servants in charge. Most of his servants were obedient, even though he was gone for 20 years. But Melanthius ate with the drunken suitors. And so what does Odysseus come back and do? He chops them up into pieces. The parallels are just too striking that people in the ancient world would have to see the unusual pieces of that story and say, yeah, Jesus is retelling the story of Odysseus for his own ends. But of course, that's mythologized.
And that's reflected in the Q document, you think?
Yeah, it's coming out of the Q doc. That story is in almost every version of Q.
Wow.
Not just mine.
That is so fascinating. And guys, there's books about that in the description if you want to look more into that. But yeah, thank you for that question. Thank you for that answer. But he actually has another question. And go subscribe to Mythvision if you haven't yet. Why doesn't mainstream New Testament scholarship take mythicism seriously? Some mythicists think it's the guild working against them like they do. Do you?
I think there's a certain amount of jealousy, but I don't think that's a good answer. I think the guild has been so oriented toward understanding the New Testament in terms of Judaism and with certain methods such as textual criticism, establishing the text, certain forms of literary criticism that are not comparative with Greco-Roman world so much, but with the Jewish Bible, form criticism, redaction criticism, some kinds of coherent literary criticism that now is being enriched with feminist interpretations, gay interpretations, and so on, that the reference tools and the education that people have when they're going into, say, ministry and learning about the Bible or the graduate school or whatever is ill-equipped to talk about mimesis or Greek poetry. So I challenge you and any of your viewers, including Derek, find an introduction to the New Testament, please, that mentions Greek poetry. find an introduction to the New Testament that talks about mimesis criticism. Go to the Anchor Bible Dictionary, 6 volumes, double columns, and see if you can find anything on Greek poetry, Homeric Epics, Athenian tragedy, or even Virgil's Aeneid. These things are entirely absent from the discipline. So what happens in the discipline is we move old pieces around in thinking we're going to find an answer to the puzzle when we leave in the box half of the puzzle pieces that would work. And when somebody comes along and finds inconvenient truths, that is, in this case, I would say the imitations of Greek poetry in the Gospels, they are dismissed. We don't have the methodologies or the reference works to support that kind of an observation. And that's why I think my work on synopses of epic, tragedy, and the Gospels is so important. It gives a reference work out there where people can make their own judgments. It establishes mimesis criticism as yet another tool that is, like others, limited in its value, but it's valuable to uncover things we haven't seen before. But I've been told by others that I shouldn't be surprised that some of the antagonism to my work is coming out of jealousy. After all, Darwin had some of the same antipathy when he did Origin of Species and so on.
And just to show you guys, if anyone is like thinking this is crazy, this is not true, check this out. In the Latin section of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a quotation from Virgil's Aeneid. So there we have slam dunk evidence that at the very least, these texts were floating around in Judea, and they knew about these texts. So that question's done with. We have physical evidence in the Dead Sea Scrolls that they knew about Virgil.
And the next line, and also found there was a bilingual list of Latin and Greek Jewish names, in addition to, so that we know it was bilingual. It's not just, they weren't just reading Greek, they were reading the Aeneid. And we have a book of the Aeneid that was found among the soldiers' remains at Masada.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So there you go. That's the end of that question right there. If they knew about it or not, they did. Derek, once again, strongest evidence for the historical Jesus in Paul. Good question. I think I skipped a couple, but I'll go back.
No, it's okay. I don't know how to get at this, Derek, in another way than to say that he is claiming that he receives traditions about Jesus. Now, where he gets them and so on, we don't know. He's not getting them from the Gospels. He apparently is not getting them from Q. He must have gotten them somehow from... Now, here's another issue, of course, and Derek, you know this. In Galatians, Paul says that he spent 2 weeks with the pillars of the church in Jerusalem. Of course, this is before the Jewish War. Now, I have a friend who says maybe Jesus went to Paul, maybe Paul went to Jerusalem to get instructions about fishing in Galilee. You know, where's the best place to cast your nets? But it's much more likely that they're talking about Jesus' tradition. And so that would be the best I could do. But apparently Paul doesn't know Q. He's getting stuff from somewhere else. And I think there are about 8 places where Paul has statements that are very close to what Jesus says in the Q document. And twice he says he's reading it from the Lord. Now, which Lord is he referring to?
Join Mythvision's Patreon today to access hundreds of videos that I have worked hard in high quality content that are not in public domain. They're only on the Patreon. You will also have direct access to me, referring academics, questions, ideas, or just want a private chat. You have that access with me. Also, I'm trying to do more traveling to educate people from more academics and expand what kind of material I do produce on Mythvision. This is a full-time gig, and you're helping the community by joining. I'm trying to put together more to educate people who have harmful cultic practices or ways in which they're harming society, we are educating them from Mythvision on better understanding these ancient texts and mythologies and history in a way like not many shows do. So please, I could use your help, and you're going to get and benefit a lot by joining as a member.